Apologies first and foremost to all the audience members. We've been facing some technical issues, but good afternoon, everyone. We're finally here, nearly all of us. One of us is also still facing a technical issue. But anyway, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Lynch and I'm the marketing executive for EQS Group, where we provide a range of compliance digital solutions to organisations of all sizes. And I'd like to welcome you today to this breakout session for the UK, Ireland and Netherlands. And this is on the Compliance Communications Challenge, using communications to build trust in your organisation and to encourage an ethical culture. So I'm pleased to be joined by 4 expert speakers. We're just waiting on one of them to hopefully overcome some technical problems. But in the meantime, we have Lisa Randles from GoodCorporation on here, Joe Morgan from BT, and Fiona Lynch from Fexco. So thank you all for joining us, and I will hand over to you shortly to do a short intro. During the session, we have a lot to cover, but we would also like to take the time to answer any of the questions you may have. So to the right of your screen, you'll be able to put in any questions that may come to mind. So please feel free to do so at any point in time during this session, and we'll get to as many as we can nearer to the end of the session. We also have planned some poll questions. So this will happen as well at various times during the session. Again, this is to the right-hand side of your screen, but I'll let you know when you can answer these poll questions when this comes through. So now I'd like to hand over to Lisa. Again, apologies. Over to you to do a short introduction, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am Lisa Randles. I'm a senior consultant at GoodCorporation. We are a management consultancy that specializes in business ethics. So we work with organizations to help build their compliance programs, to assess how well their compliance and speak up processes are working. And we work exclusively in the areas of business ethics. So things like codes of conduct, speak up, anti-bribery and corruption, human rights, and increasingly ESG, because this tends to wrap up all of those things and a bit more. My personal background's in communications. I spent about 10 years working at a global PR firm, where I worked primarily with large multinational organizations, and then another 10 years working in-house in communications roles, doing both internal and external communications before I moved into compliance.
Thanks, Lisa. So hi, my name is Fiona Lynch. I'm Head of Risk and Compliance for Fexco Asset Finance. Fexco Asset Finance is a retail credit firm regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland, and we provide leasing and hire purchase loans to the consumer and SME market. My role is managing the risk and compliance function for Fexco Asset Finance on a daily basis. Over to you, Joe.
Thanks, Fiona. I'm Joe Morgan. I'm the Ethics and Compliance Director for BT Group, which is the national telecommunications carrier, amongst other things, for the UK, but also has a lot of global interests. I've been here a couple of years, handling broad remit, general ethics, ABC, international trade, and some of our communications regulations compliance activity. Prior to that, I was with Rolls-Royce during the issues with the SFO, the DOJ and the MPF in Brazil. And prior to that, I was with a company called IMI, who were also prosecuted by the DOJ for bribery and corruption offences. So I'm enjoying a different existence at BT, which is nice. By background, I'm a lawyer, but I've been doing ethics and compliance exclusively for about 15 years now.
Perfect. Thank you all so much for that introduction. Again, we are waiting on one more speaker. So if he can join at some point, I'm hoping we'll do a short introduction at that point in time. But Lisa, I'll hand over to you and you should be able to see your slides.
I can indeed. Thank you. So I am very eager to hear from Joe and Fiona and hopefully Harald in a bit. But we thought that before we start talking to them about their practical experience inside of organizations, it might be helpful to just talk a little bit about what ethical culture looks like in an organization. and how communications can be used to help build a culture where integrity is very much valued and encouraged. So we've done a lot of work assessing business ethics practices in organizations. That is one of the main areas of business for us. We look at the governance, processes, and policies in place. We look at how organizations interact with customers. We look at labor standards, how they treat their employees, how they manage their suppliers. And we've been doing that for 20 years. That process has really helped us to understand what the key characteristics are of organizations that have a strong ethical culture. And we've boiled this down to what we call drivers. So these are sort of the 10 characteristics, really, that we find most often present in organizations that score well in our assessments of ethical business practices. So I'll talk about some of these drivers in detail, but there are things like a strong ethical tone from the top, which is something that I think we're going to probably hear about over and over today. I hope so anyway. This is really senior management communicates directly to employees that the organization is committed to operating with integrity, and that management is open to identifying and hearing about concerns related to behavior and ethics in the organization. These are also organizations where the board is engaged, where they're monitoring compliance risks and the corporate culture, and they're helping to resolve problems when they arise. If we think about the role that communications can play when it comes to tone from the top, some of the strategies that companies use is to have a CEO introduction to the code of conduct. Some language directly from the CEO that really emphasizes the value that the organization places on operating with integrity above all else, and assurance that employees and all stakeholders really will be listened to and protected if they speak up about bad behavior and activities that are inconsistent with the values and the code of conduct in the organization. Another one of the drivers, I'm just going to highlight a few of them. Employees feel supported to do the right thing. And this really means that there's clear guidance on what's expected of them, that they have information on compliance policies, they know where to find that, and that it's very clear to them what the expectations are for them in terms of conflicts of interest, anti-bribery and corruption, speaking up. That there's also channels in place where employees can ask questions if they're unsure about what they should do, or if they don't understand a policy. And really importantly, and something again that'll come up, I think, over and over today, is that they trust that they can raise issues with the organization, that they'll be treated well if they do ask a question or raise an issue. If we think about the role that communications plays with helping employees to feel supported, it's really about having company policies that are written in understandable, supportive language, that they're formatted in a way that's engaging and easy for employees to read, and that those policies aren't just put on the business management system and forgotten, that there are opportunities for employees to talk and ask questions about compliance and what's expected of them. That might be a Q&A facility on the intranet where they can ask questions of the compliance team or the legal team. Maybe it's quarterly webinars with the compliance team, and ideally someone in the business leadership team where they talk about key topics and have an opportunity to ask questions. So again, it's really just about helping employees to know what's expected of them and to feel supported in doing the right thing in the organization. And I'll just highlight one more, which is driver 6 on that list on the screen. And that's that employees have confidence in processes for them to raise concerns. We're going to talk a bit about whistleblowing and speak up today. So this one's quite relevant for our discussion. This really boils down to there's clear confidentiality and non-retaliation policies, that employees have options on how to speak up and how to raise concerns. Maybe that's speaking up directly to the compliance team or the general counsel or to HR, that there's a speak up channel where they can report concerns anonymously or confidentially if that's how they feel most comfortable doing it. And I think also it's really important that organizations are training line managers to hear concerns and to know what to do with concerns when they're raised with them, that they know how to deal with them sensitively and that they know how to escalate appropriately. There's no question that the success of the Speak Up program hedges on whether employees believe the organization wants to hear from them, and that employees trust that it'll treat them fairly if they speak up. So tone from the top is really important. And also ensuring there's good communication throughout the Speak Up process so that the experience of raising a concern is a good one, whatever the outcome. One of the things that we often recommend for clients is sharing learnings from Speak Up internally. So it could be the types of concerns that are being raised and also any changes that the organization is making in response. Because that provides really important reinforcement of the value of speaking up to the organization. So I suspect you will hear more about many of these drivers in our discussion this afternoon. But I also just wanted to share a short slide that outlines some communication strategies that you might want to take away and consider how you can build these into your compliance program. So the compliance calendar, I mean, this is really just about being organized and systematic about building communications on compliance topics around all of the other activities that the organization has going on. It could be putting up posters, speak up posters about bullying and harassment if the company's running a, if HR is running a month-long campaign on bullying and harassment in the organization. It could be that you need to increase the visibility of the Speak Up channel to the sales team, toward the end of the financial year when people might be feeling a little pressured to boost their performance. So, meet with your internal communications team and see how you can work closely with them to really build a calendar for compliance communications that supports what you need, the messages you need to get out within the organization. I talked a little bit about using executive communications. These can be videos, newsletter articles. I noticed that on the HSBC website, there is on the Behaving Responsibly page of the website, there's a letter from the CEO, which just starts saying, how we operate is as important as what we do, and then goes on to talk about why sustainability and responsible behavior matters for HSBC. And it's those kinds of messages that, are made publicly, that are made loudly within an organization, that really drive home to employees that management supports doing the right thing, and that they can play a role in that. They should be playing a role in that. Make it memorable. I mean, a tagline or a slogan for your Speak Up line or your code of ethics, is another strategy that we've seen companies use. Unilever used to have the tagline. I don't think they actually use it anymore. They've just redone their code of conduct in the last year. But they used to have the tagline, business integrity, it's how we work. And it appeared on every page of the website related to the code of conduct. It appeared on every page of the code. And AstraZeneca has branded its Speak Up line as AZ Ethics. It has its own logo. But what that does is it just becomes recognizable and becomes memorable for people in the organization. So they know when they see that logo for the AstraZeneca, for AZ Ethics, they know exactly what that is, and they're reminded that that Speak Up channel is there for them. Leverage microlearning. So microlearning is a real trend in e-learning these days, and it's a really good way to release very small kind of snippets of training without having to build quizzes and 2-hour compliance sessions around it on short topics. So it could be on gifts and hospitality, it could be on conflicts of interest. Microlearning is a great way to just put some training out there for employees to be able to use as and when they can on topics that are hot and important in different parts of the business. So if you create a whole catalog of microlearning modules, it's just something that you can have on hand and make available as you need them. And I'll just talk about 2 more of these. before we get into, I know that Joe and Fiona are going to talk a lot about how they're using different strategies in their own organizations, but bringing the code of conduct to life is a really important one. We've had so much interest recently in companies wanting to redo their codes of conduct. I think post-COVID, people are thinking about how to communicate with employees, how to make sure that employees know that the company is looking after them. And they're getting more and more creative with how they approach codes of conduct. So bring your code of conduct to life could be, Shell has a QR code that opens up on underneath the CEO letter introducing the code of conduct, and it opens up a video of the chief executive talking about the code and how important it is. And we have another client who's done training around, created small training modules on each kind of section of the code of conduct that can be delivered by local managers or by their compliance ambassadors in the organization, to just make sure that this isn't just a document that gets buried on the intranet, but that it's rather something that's being talked about all the time. So find ways to bring the code of conduct to life. And then finally, Integrity Day or week events. You know, the NHS does, October is Speak Up Month in the NHS, for example. And in that month, they've got loads of videos being released. They've got lots of events that they host. They release some research. And it's just a way to kind of, you know, reinforce all of the messages that employees and other stakeholders should know about compliance with your organization if you build it around a sort of integrity week or an integrity day. You could look at releasing microlearning during the week, having some executive videos, maybe some topic-specific live chats or webinars, release some employee survey data related to compliance or ethics in the organizations, how, you know, the ethical culture of your organizations. Use your imagination, really. I think I'm going to leave it at that because I know that Joe and Fiona and hopefully Harald will be talking more practically about how they've used a lot of these kinds of strategies in their organizations.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm really trying to get Harald to join. I can keep seeing that he's coming in and then flying back out. So I'm hoping that it might mean we're a bit closer to having him on board. But for now, we'll carry on with the session and hopefully be able to come back to Harald a little bit later in the session. So I'd like to move on to a poll question for the audience members to answer. So as you can see on the slide, the question is, which of the following best describes the approach to ethics and compliance in your organization? So answer A would be, we have put limited effort into ethics and compliance. Answer B, we have policies on some compliance topics and do some training. And C, we have a coordinated program to promote ethics and compliance throughout the organization. So if all has worked well, the poll has been published. So if you could choose A, B, or C on the right-hand side of your screen, which I can see some people are answering now. So we'll give you a few more seconds just to answer these polls. I'll end it in a couple of seconds. Oh, still people are answering. Just want to give a couple more seconds. Okay, perfect. I will end the poll there. So if I show the results to everyone as well. So majority hit C, or 55% to be precise. 40% clicked B and 5% clicked A. So now, Lisa, if I hand over to you, I think we'll be covering a lot of these questions off with the panelists in regards to that poll question. So if I hand back over to you.
Great. Good. Yeah, I was quite pleased to see this. So it looks like we've got a majority who have quite a coordinated, what they would see as quite a coordinated ethics and compliance program. And then just below that is people who have lots of compliance activities in place, but not necessarily using them in a coordinated way as part of a program. So Fiona, I thought actually I might just start with you. You know, what does building a compliance, how do you set up an ethics and compliance program in an organization like Fexco? You know, what does that mean to you? Because I suspect it might be quite different than how it looks for BT or Tata Steel.
Yeah, so I think firstly, I think with every kind of ethics and compliance program that you have, I think, and I know I'm kind of going to reiterate some of the topics that you mentioned in your slides, but it is establishing that code of conduct and your policies and procedures. I think it's so important, let's say when you're drafting that code of conduct, that you really determine what your organization's ethical values are, because those ethical values have to be the foundation on which your firm operates. And then as well, I think, as you mentioned, that there needs to be that senior management buy-in. They have to be believing in those ethical values, and they have to want those ethical values embedded in all of its business operations. And then once you have that ethical values defined, it's important you put it into the code of conduct that goes out to all employees. And then the next thing what we would do is that we would focus on our policies and procedures. So with the policies and procedures, we would make sure that all of our business operations are included in them, along with our compliance activities. The main key point about the policies and procedures is to make sure that there's not, let's say, compliance jargon that people don't understand. Is to have clear, concise messaging in those policies and procedures, and ensuring that people know who's involved, who you can contact, and what is their role in getting this ethics and compliance program perfected. I think the next kind of key step in doing your ethics and compliance program then is ensuring that there is appropriate governance. So there has to be a proper governance in place, and that allows for, let's say, clear reporting lines of issues raised, but most importantly then it also allows you to actually test the ability of your ethics and compliance program, and will highlight, you know, if something has been missed in out of your policies and procedures, something that you need to focus on for the year going forward. And of course, the fundamental piece to all of this actually working is training and communicating this to all employees within the organization. And again, it's kind of reiterating your slides there again, using that language that people can understand and that they know how they're involved and what they must do. And with that, I think with the training, you need to ensure that it goes to new hires, but also that there's annual refreshers. So when we talk about the annual refreshers, I think it's very important to remind them of your code of conduct, but also it will help them incorporate any changes that you may have to your program within the year, whether it be the e-learning module or the micro-learning module that you mentioned.
Great. I think I might dig into some of that in a minute. But Joe, do you want to just talk a bit about, for you in at BT and also kind of in the other organizations you've worked at, you know, what does an ethics and compliance program look like? Where do you start? How do you communicate it?
Yeah, all my comments will be more general based on my general experience with 3 different companies. And obviously a lot of what Fiona has said rings true. And I always find in terms of communicating it, it's really helpful if you do sort of present the compliance program as a connected framework, because a lot of the time people don't always understand, you know, how it all fits together, and you know, therefore don't really understand how the kind of sausage gets made, if I can put it that way. So I always think about, yeah, understanding those risks first. Everything that Fiona said about ethical values and making sure you get the right buy-in is critical. But once you've done that, it's understanding the risk in the different areas that you might be looking at from an ethics and compliance point of view. And they will vary very much from company to company and what each company is exposed to. Getting those policies and procedures right and getting the training communication right, absolutely key, because that for me is all in the prevent space. So if I always think of the programs as prevent, detect and respond kind of circle, and all of that is in the good prevent space for me. Then making sure you've got the right sort of technical advice also in the prevent space, but can help to respond to some of the issues that we might find on a day-to-day basis. And then critically having really good monitoring and assurance in place, because without that, you're not going to be able to build on that continuous improvement that Fiona touched on, in terms of making sure that the programme continues to respond to the needs of the business and the risks that it faces. Because it's really easy for programmes to get very stale if you're not able to make them dynamic and understand the learnings from either the issues that you're seeing, or things that have been raised as breaches or speak up cases, or those kinds of issues. Because unless you understand what's gone wrong in that sort of root cause analysis of those issues, you don't know how to fix it in that sort of first part of the wheel. So I always see it as that sort of continuous wheel of improvement, having all of those key elements in place. And I think, like I say, communicating that is actually critical, because people can see how it all fits together then. And then I think also it's really good for your teams, because they understand which part they're actually involved into, which leads to a better engagement and driving the programme forward. So it's much, I always find this the best way to sort of organise a programme, if I can put it that way.
And I thought it's quite interesting, 40% of the people who responded to the poll said that they have some policies and procedures in place and they do some training, but don't necessarily see that they have a kind of coordinated program. And Joe, you talked about this framework that you sort of see all of the ethics and compliance activities fitting into. Can you describe a bit on kind of practically how you take it from being policies and procedures to a more coordinated framework, and what that means for how it operates? Because I think a lot of organizations are probably in a position where they've got policies in place, they do training, but they're not necessarily sure that everything's moving in the same, direction.
Yeah, I think it's about, Fiona touched on this as well, about keeping your language simple, but keeping the messages simple. When you're doing the training, trying to bring it to life with real life examples, get people to bring forth the things that they find tricky on a day-to-day basis, so that they understand the clear requirements, and then they actually can put it into practice, because that's often the best way of making it live and breathe. I get very turned off if I have to sit through something where people are going through the law in great detail, for example, even though I am a lawyer. I think doing that will really switch people off, but putting it into practice and saying, well, here's where we see some risks and challenges within the organisation, and getting people to talk about it. People remember stories far more than they will remember the sort of black letter law or even the policies. So it's really about bringing the key requirements simple, clear and quick, but then putting it into practice with good stories to get people to think about it in the context of their day-to-day, and then ask questions and make sure that you've got people on hand to answer them. Because one of the things I think, online training has its place and it can be very useful, but actually there's no substitute for subject matter experts getting out there, understanding what people are facing in the business and being able to help them with those real issues. Because I say everybody learns better that way and engages around the reasons why better. For me, that connection to the purpose of the business, the two things can't be separate. You can't have the sort of purpose of the business over here and the ethics and compliance program over here. You have to bring the two together so that people really care about what they're doing, understand why it's important they do the right thing, and the program supports them. And you can only really do that by those shared experiences and the stories to connect the two really clearly in people's minds.
I'm hopeful we might have Harald soon. We'll see. Fiona, I wonder if you want to just talk a little bit about culture at Fexco, and how important is culture versus the policies and the kind of process, compliance processes that you have in place? how do they interact? What role does
Yeah.
each play?
Like, I think culture is a way more powerful way of actually controlling employees' behaviors than, you know, rules listed in a policy. Culture is that aspect that, let's say, informs employees' decision making by knowing, let's say, what is right from wrong. And of course, unfortunately, we all have our policies and procedures, and we, as much as we try to make them live documents, they won't always be live documents. And, you know, that culture bridges that gap by ensuring that employees will know what to do when something is not actually listed in your policy and procedure. Unfortunately, developing that culture is not, let's say, an easy task, but I think if you have the fundamentals to that, it is possible. And like, that's again going back to your code of conduct, making sure that senior management, there's buy-in, they lead by example, you know, hiring employees that actually align to those values, training and communicating, of course, recognizing good employees' behaviors and rewarding them for those behaviors to make sure that it actually continues. And then on the flip side, if there's employees, let's say, not complying with, let's say, your code of conduct, you know, the culture of your company, your policies and procedures, that you may have to consider, you know, disciplinary action. I think those fundamentals will help drive your culture of your company.
Joe, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience with culture and your organizations?
Yeah, again, Fiona's right. It's you can't really do anything without the right culture and the right tone from all parts of the organisation. And I think, again, it's back for me. It's back to that again, that connection to purpose. Because if people don't have pride in what they do, or don't feel that what they do is important, or what the company that they work for does is important, then there isn't much incentive to do the right thing, because you've kind of lost that desire to do the right thing, or the recognition that it's important to do the right thing. And one of the best examples that I have had of that is in a former organisation. We used to do a global ethics shutdown day, which was always a lot of fun, because we do, you know, quite a bit about the purpose of the company, and the senior leaders talking about all the great things we've done in the previous year, really inspiring stuff that would really get people engaged on the purpose, and perhaps do a little bit of a breakout sessions locally on, you know, exactly what the particular factory, as it was a heavy manufacturing business, what that particular factory did, what the products went on to do, because sometimes that's very hard in industrial engineering to understand what the widget that you're producing goes on to do. And I remember sitting with a guy one time who'd worked there well over 30 years, doing the same job every day. And he said, you know what, this is the first time I've understood what the thing that I make every day actually goes on to do. And now I get it, why it's really important that I do my quality checks and all that, because I wouldn't want to let the customers down and the application of that product down. And that to me was like, yes, because we'd actually connected the doing the right thing with the business imperative. And that shows that sort of a culture where the what and the how are just as important as each other. And it's that practical demonstration of that, where we got to somebody who, you know, prior to that was probably, you know, engaged with his job in the sense that he was coming to work every day and doing it, but not engaged in the same way. The other thing that we did with part of that, those shutdown days, is we pick something to do from an ethics and compliance point of view for training, but we'd always try and make it interesting. We'd gamify it. One year it was snakes and ladders. You know, we did lots of different weird and wonderful things to try and keep it fresh and engaging. And then in the afternoon, and it comes back to one of the drivers on your slides, Lisa, is we used to allow everybody in the business to go out and help in the local community, do something that was important. And I think that showed that we as an organisation didn't just say what we thought the culture should be, or that what we thought the policies should be, or just that lip service. We actually gave life to it by giving people the opportunity to give back. And a lot of the time it was helping people who were less fortunate. And sometimes you come back and the the bang for your buck in terms of how people feel about where they work, and therefore the importance of behaving themselves, doing the right thing, all of that becomes amplified by the fact that people have seen how much the business has invested in this, and there isn't really any substitute for having that senior buy-in, that connection to purpose, and those actions behind the words, because that builds that all-important culture.
Yeah, I think it's I love that example, because I think we often talk about ethical culture as though it's this kind of subset of culture overall, and in fact, a lot of these things, employees feel supported to do the right thing. It applies just as much to the kind of, employees feeling willing to put their new idea forward in the marketing department, without being rudely chided and told to, sit down and let somebody more important come up with the plan. I mean, these are all just kind of examples of really good corporate culture anyway, and that works across the entire business, making sure that employees and everyone else, suppliers are treated properly, and then they do well for you. Customers treat you well, and it improves your brand value to them. So I think we often talk about ethical culture as though it's this special thing, but in fact, it really is just something that, as you say, comes right, is connected right to the corporate purpose, and should live through the entire business like that. One of the other things that I didn't touch on, but I know is quite important to a lot of organizations, is compliance ambassadors. And I know, Fiona, you talked a bit about this as well. Who plays a role in compliance in your organization, and how do you mobilize those people? What kind of training do they receive? How do you use them?
Yeah, so let's say our heads of risk and compliance, let's say, would be our ambassadors for, ethics and compliance, and we would all receive internal training. Some of that training includes, let's say, conflict of interest, anti-bribery and corruption, and so on. And then also, as part of our qualifications, we would have to do 15 hours of CPD, which is continuous professional development. And one of those hours specifically is dedicated to ethics. And then more on from that, though, is that we put the onus on the employees themselves, to partake and be, the driver for change, and make sure that they have ethics and compliance perfected. And that really ensures that, that it's not just these nominated individuals that are responsible for the ethics and compliance program, that everyone has to partake in it in order to work. And yeah, we would have training, let's say, rolled out to employees on a yearly basis. Some of those would have an assessment element to make sure that, they understand completely what is our purpose and what are we driving for. And then that also highlights the employees that would require further training if necessary.
Joe, how do you use compliance ambassadors or other people throughout the business on compliance?
Yeah, I mean, in different organisations, I've used it in different ways. So again, going back to the sort of ethics shutdown day, we used to use employees to train employees in that scenario. And that was always quite powerful, because it was that sort of local connection and not just the same faces all the time. So, and we would train them, full days, in-person training each year, and that was again quite powerful from my perspective, because I'd get to hear all kinds of things that were happening in the organisation or concerns that people had got. So those trainers in that instance became our ambassadors and became a very useful conduit for issues in the business, because they would hear in turn lots of things that happen that people would tell them during training or at other times, because they'd recognise them as somebody who was engaged in this topic. I have used formal ethics points of contact or ambassadors in the past too. I think sometimes the results can be quite mixed there. It just does depend on whether somebody is a volunteer or they've perhaps been press ganged into it a little, as to how proactive or otherwise they can be. And I think sometimes it can be very helpful, because people are a local contact and people might feel more comfortable raising issues with somebody they know. Other times it can, you can rely quite heavily on that kind of network, and if it's not operating effectively, that can actually be quite dangerous because you're not actually getting through because you've got people who aren't engaged in the purpose. So I kind of believe in them overall, but I think it's something that has to be managed carefully, and making sure that people are actually, you know, if you're relying on them to help get messages out there or to receive reports about things or help people, they have to be proactive, and in that regard it is much better if you've got people who are volunteers and you know, very willing, as opposed to people who've been told, oh, this is part of your responsibilities now, because that doesn't always work. Obviously we also have, you know, formal people responsible in each business for risk compliance assurance type activity, but when we're using those sort of more like say goodwill ambassador type roles, I say it has to be with the goodwill. I would say that's, I've had experiences where it just doesn't, you know, hasn't worked so well.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Fiona and Joe, for answering those questions. I can see Harald's still trying to get in. I'm really hoping he's able to. If not, we may have to do a separate session with him because his point of view is super valuable to this. But for now, I'd like to turn to another poll question. So I'm putting the slides back on. So this poll question is, do you have a whistleblowing system in place? So A is yes, B is no, you don't have a formal system in place, or C, not at the moment, but you're planning on establishing one. So again, like the first poll question, you can pick between A, B, and C, and that should have been published in the right-hand side panel for you now. So I'll give you a few seconds again to answer that poll question. And just to let you know, throughout this session, please feel free to put in any questions that you may have to the speakers that we can get to a little bit nearer the end of the session on anything they're discussing, and hopefully we'll be able to answer as many as we can. So if we just wait a few more seconds. Okay, it's changing quite a lot, but I'll end the poll there. So on this one, if I show the results, so 87.8% of people said that yes, they do have a formal system in place. 6.1% said no, they don't have a formal system in place, and the same amount said that they don't at the moment, but they are planning on having one in place. So Lisa, if I hand back over to you to take it from there.
Yeah, well, there's a clear majority on the call, which is good because it just helps us to understand kind of where everyone's at, and be able to talk about speak up and whistleblowing from that perspective. So so Joe, maybe I'll start with you here. You know, what do you think is important in a whistleblowing system, and what channels do you make available? What channels have worked most effectively, I guess, in the various roles that you've had? You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, because all of my roles have been in organisations that have had global presence, for me, having an independently run whistleblowing line where people can use a telephone or make a report via the internet in their own language has actually been super important, because some of the issues that people wanted to raise, that they need to be able to do that in their own language. So I've used a variety of suppliers over the years, but that's been really critical for me, and the fact that it is independent and that therefore people can be anonymous subject to local laws, and that there is certainly a level of confidentiality provided. That's also been very important because it's made a lot of people feel a lot more comfortable about raising an issue if they don't feel that they can raise it locally with their management. So that kind of, for me, in the organisations that I've worked in, that independent provision in multiple languages, super important. And then going on from that, I've had some really great expert teams who have been responsible for triaging things, supervising investigations, keeping things moving, because nothing destroys a speak up culture quicker than if people speak up and they perceive that nothing's happening. So keeping that regular dialogue with reporters and keeping them engaged where possible with the report is really, really important to me, because say if you have the courage to speak up, and sometimes it takes a lot of courage depending on the topic, and then you think it's just fallen into a black hole and nobody's doing anything with it, then you'll start to say, well, I rang Speak Up, or I made a report to Speak Up, and nothing's happened, and so what's the point? And I think that keeping things moving as quickly as HR policies and whatever will allow, but keeping that reporter just aware, we haven't forgotten you, we are moving it forward, it is still happening, is really, really important to building that view that there is a point to speaking up and something will happen. You're right, you made the remarks earlier, Lisa, not everybody will be happy with the outcome that they get, but it's about how they're treated, and how seriously the organisation takes it will at least go some way to making them feel like they've been heard, and that, like I say, there is a point to that speaking up. So that those are the facets that have been important for the organisations I've worked in. I think the ability to speak up locally, we've already referenced training for line managers, making them aware that whilst we often communicate a lot to employees saying speak up, speak up, speak up, making sure that people are aware it's really important to listen and to take some action as well if somebody's raising something more locally. So those are the things that I think, having that independence, having somewhere where people can go that is a formal channel, but having informal channels available where people are ready to listen and act is also really important.
Yeah, just to reiterate everything that Joe was saying there, you want to encourage that environment where workers can, raise concerns that they will know that where they will be dealt with, let's say, fairly and comprehensively. You also, let's say, want to show the workers that any, reports made in good faith, they will be protected. And then on the other side, you want to show workers where reports are made maliciously that are known to be untrue, that disciplinary action will follow. And, as Joe mentioned there, you want to make several channels available to workers, and one of those channels being that external, reporting channel, that's your integrity line. And of course, let's say to provide a mechanism where any reports made, are done in confidence, let's say that they're protected, that they will make sure that, they remain anonymous when required, that the whole process is confidential, and that also, that key piece about listening and acting for them is that they're supported during the course of their employment. And then, of course, when Joe was mentioning there is about, the local, avenues that they can take, whether it be email or by phone or whatever, that they can do that. And there's nominated individuals across the entity. It might not be possible, let's say, to be able to make that report to maybe a senior exec or, your line manager or whoever the case may be, that you could have those nominated individuals across your entity that would allow you to be one of those reporting channels. And then going back to Joe's previous comment about the volunteers, you want to make sure that those nominated individuals are actually suitable for the role.
Can I just ask, maybe both of you can just in turn kind of expand on this, about kind of investigations procedures and the kind of the back end processes. So, you know, we understand kind of how the reports come in, but how formalized are the investigations procedures? Or is there a template investigations plan? You know, are you sort of operating at that level so that people know exactly what they need to do as part of an investigation and you have a clean record of what's being done, or is it more informal? Does it depend?
From my perspective, we have formal procedures around exactly the prioritization of cases, the people who can and should investigate them, how they do that, templates. You know, we have the works, and I have done in all of the organisations, because it's been, you know, I think that's super important for ensuring consistency and ultimately transparency if you need to prove that you've handled things on a fair and consistent basis. So I think that's really important. It also really helps for those who are having to do the investigations, who sometimes will be experts. I've been, again, lucky enough to work with really good security functions who've got really expert investigators in there, which is great. But sometimes on the more HR related matters, it might just be an independent investigating manager who's never done anything like this before. So again, I've set up in the past in-person training sessions for people if they think that they're going to, or they are somebody who regularly gets asked to do these things, or modules that people can sit if it's the first time they're being asked to do stuff that are pre-recorded, just to kind of give them the confidence and the tools to be able to do it and to do it well, and to make sure that there are no missteps from a procedural point of view, because again, that treating cases with fairness, consistency and professionalism is really important. It goes back to the integrity of the speak up process and the sort of requirements to be open, transparent, and making sure that the reporter feels cared for, as well as those people who have been complained about, because it's a very difficult situation for them. So that having standard procedures and that encourage that sort of fairness and consistency is important from everybody's perspective, I would say.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly what Joe was saying there. You know, there is a set procedure that we follow, and again, it's to make sure that there is fairness, and so that people know, you know, what's the appropriate steps to do. But I just want to hone in on Joe's comments there about the training. You know, giving those people, those nominated individuals, you know, who are going to be part of the investigation, real life, you know, test scenarios where they know exactly what to do is really effective, because it ensures then that, you know, that confidentiality, that anonymity when required will remain at the forefront of the training, and it ensures then that there's, you know, consistency across the board. I think that's very, very important. And then just as well, while we're on about training, you know, it's important as well that you do testing of, you know, your channels to make sure that they're actually working in practice, especially when we talk about, you know, that external integrity line. You want to make sure that it is, you know, redacting information as required, and that, you know, that you ensure that going forward that it will do that, because if it doesn't, you will lose the trust of your workers and then your system has failed. And it's really important that you do an annual test of that line, ensuring that it actually remains, you know, fit for purpose. So ensuring that the systems remain fit for purpose and ensuring that those nominated individuals are suitable for the role that they're going to carry out is very important, and ensuring that that training takes place.
Great, thank you very much. I don't know whether any of you are dealing with works councils and those sorts of things in your organizations. Joe, you maybe have in the past, but there are lots of concerns often, not just with kind of unions and works councils, but also managers about the potential for malicious reports, and and also just this process which you've touched on about having to ensure that confidentiality and anonymity are protected where appropriate. So can you talk a little bit about your experiences there and what steps you do take in your organizations to safeguard confidentiality?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one on the sort of malicious use side of things. Maybe I have just been very lucky over the last 15 years, but very, very rarely do I see malicious use. Occasionally people will have a bit of sport where I certainly used to get a whistleblowing every year that was actually the fact pattern of a Brazilian soap opera. And the first time I read it, I was horrified. And it was only when I got in touch with my in-country investigator when he said, "Oh, somebody's having some fun with you, Joe. This is what's going on in the Brazilian equivalent of EastEnders at the moment." So occasionally I get something like that. Very, very occasionally will I get what I consider proper malicious use, where people are making things up. In that scenario, I have, again, obviously they tend to be anonymous ones. I have posted either back through the call centre or on the chat in the report that somebody might have made online, a malicious use warning that is put in a positive light, but saying, by making things up and diverting attention away from people being able to look into real problems in the company, you're actually harming the company overall, so stop doing it. And that tends to work where I might have had a repeated number of reports on the same theme that have turned out to be entirely false. So from that point of view, do work quite hard to be very judicious about the ones that we sort of do take to full investigation if we feel like there's an issue with somebody making up reports. We're also, I think, in all the organisations I've worked for, being very careful about making sure that we don't just go running off and starting to investigate everything. If people don't provide enough specificity to their complaint or their report, then again, we'll go back and ask for information. We'll provide the ability to give us more information. But if they choose not to, then again, we don't go running off to investigate everything, because again, that can harm the reputation of Speak Up overall if we're sort of just going off and doing investigations that are not well founded. But also again, I come back to the person's complained about. It's not very fair, again, if you've got very general allegations and that you're not, it becomes too much of a fishing expedition, and it has the potential to harm their reputation. So from that perspective, we're very careful about exactly how we take something forward and when we take something forward. And in terms of the guarding the confidentiality of the line, we approach it very much on a need-to-know basis, and that we are very careful to redact names where we'd sort of, if we need to generally share fact patterns for audit and things like that, we're very careful to make sure that we don't provide anything that would identify reporters or the persons complained about. Different, perhaps when we get something substantiated, but even then we're very careful about how we use that information. And certainly in terms of the team that I have looking at the Speak Up cases, it's a very small team, very tight, and we don't that they are supreme in their sort of, sometimes I don't even know the details. It's, it is, if I don't need to, I don't know it. And I think that's really important for the integrity of the line, that people feel that confidence, that the confidentiality and integrity will be retained. And certainly when it comes to reviewing the output of cases, that's the same. We have a multidisciplinary forum that looks at cases, but again, looks in the fact patterns in a pared down way, so that confidentiality and anonymity, where we need it to be, is protected.
Yeah, I think, just going back to the malicious reports there, that, to address those managers' concerns or union leaders, I think you need to implement a, zero tolerance approach to both sides of the coin, that if workers are making reports that are known by them to be untrue and they're done maliciously, that, disciplinary action has to be followed. That's a breach of your code of conduct. And I think on the other side, if workers are, making reports that, that is, it might be unfounded, but if they are, making them in good faith, and if they're getting harassed in any way, or, getting penalized in any sort of form, that too is also, a breach of your code of conduct, and disciplinary action has to follow. I think that's the best way to manage those concerns, implementing a zero tolerance approach to both sides of the coin. And then again, when we talk about how do you maintain the confidentiality and the of your integrity line, again, that goes back to training that we've just spoken about, doing those real life scenario based trainings, making sure that your systems are tested before making them go live, making them subject to an audit, all again, making sure that there's proper governance in place. I think all of those things would, really address those concerns and ensure that the confidentiality of the system remains at the forefront of it.
Thank you. So one last question, maybe we can talk a little bit about reporting and KPIs. This is always a fun one when it comes to Speak Up, because lots of companies have very different ways that they do this, and lots of companies are terrified of doing any of it. So I wonder if you guys can just talk a little bit about how you provide transparency of outcomes on whistleblowing and Speak Up, but also, what kind of reporting you do and what kind of KPIs you use. This is something that we're starting to hear from clients, that investors are asking. They want to know what the KPIs are that organizations have in place. So I think probably it's an interesting topic for everybody.
I'll let Fiona go first. I've had a good going first on this topic.
Yeah, so I think, look, of course, it'll depend on every scenario that happens, whether, there's legal implications or whether it has to go externally. When we talk about, let's say, a worker making a report, it's very important that they are kept informed and that you are, transparent with them. Of course, you won't be able to give them, a detailed explanation of the investigation, but even a progress update will suffice. Then also when, the investigation is concluded, I do think it is very important to be transparent with, the wider workforce. I think just in terms of an organization standpoint, that you're showing that those bad behaviors will not be tolerated. You're ensuring that, workers know then that reports that are made are actually investigated, acted upon, and concluded in a fair and comprehensive manner. And then also, it might act as a learning point for the organization themselves. Is there some additional controls that need to be put in place? And then, of course, external reporting again will depend on the scenario, especially with the new directive, and the prescribed persons. PCF holders will have, their own obligations in terms of the central bank. So yeah, depending on the scenario, but that's what we do.
Do you have particular KPIs that you use, Fiona, as part of your
Like,
system?
internally, let's say, yeah, it would be reported again, up the chain to command, and of course against governance. And any, let's say, reports, there would be a trend analysis to see, what's happening, and is it, a specific environmental, let's say, issue. But yeah, that's what our KPI would really be. It would be reported either way.
If I can just pick up, I've always used KPIs on kind of days open for cases, because again, it goes back to the point that I made earlier on of if people are to have confidence in the process, it needs to be dealt with as swiftly and appropriately. I'm not in for just closing them early for the sake of it. It's got to be appropriate investigations. But, I have been in organisations and have heard of other organisations where, relatively straightforward speak-ups are open for months. And that cannot be the right way to go. The directive will force us down and being more efficient in that regard. But I really believe in terms of encouraging a good culture where people feel that there is a point speaking up and stuff will happen. It has to be dealt with in an efficient manner, and it has to be prioritized. And one of the best things that I again have done in my past is have some KPIs on the business in terms of ensuring that investigations are got on with and done properly, and that yes, there's some objective measures that in terms of days open, but also some subjective measures about the quality and the and also tracking the actions coming out of any investigation. So they're all things that I've reported on in the past and that have been relevant to the business for, in certain cases, it's contributed to a sort of ethics and compliance element of bonuses for people. But it is super critical, and particularly that point about tracking outcomes. I've used outcomes, in learnings, dilemmas, case studies, those kinds of things, suitably anonymised so that the organisation can learn. But I am always very keen on making sure that the organisation learns from issues on whistleblowing that have come through whistleblowing and understands the root cause of them. Nothing gets me more irritated than, as I have, throughout my career, of sort of somebody saying, "Oh, yeah, no, we had this issue, 3 years ago, 5 years ago," and the same root cause has been the cause again, which shows that we learned nothing from the previous incident and that we did not fix the root cause. We might have put the sticking plaster on it, we might have fired somebody, we might have just, done a bit of local activity, but we haven't really fixed what caused that issue in the first place. And that to me is super important, because organizations will just drain resource, money, all kinds of things if they can't fix the root causes. And it's really, really irritating to those who might have raised it previously if they then see it happen again a few years down the line. Not least of which, like I say, it's really irritating to somebody like me sitting in my position to say, did we learn nothing? Did we not really think about the circumstances that brought this to bear in the first place? Because that's how you learn and you get better. The whole point of ethics and compliance programs is to be there to help nip things in the bud, to make issues fewer, to make issues less serious, so that you've got a better, more sustainable business that is better run and not leaking money through lots of litigation or other issues cropping up. Because if you don't, then you're sort of at some point the business is going to stumble into something really serious. And obviously I've been part of businesses that have, and a lot of the time all the signals were there, and perhaps even people had spoken up about things in the past and the organisation had not chosen to really think about what caused it and therefore fix it so that it didn't become more serious.
Thank you, everyone on here. Thank you, Lisa, for facilitating that part of the session, and Fiona and Joe for answering those questions. I'd like to turn to some questions from the audience. I know, Joe, you've had an unavoidable meeting crop up, so you'll need to leave in about 10 minutes. So if we get through a few of these whilst you're still on, and then Fiona and Lisa will stay on and answer as many as we can. It probably won't take the full time that we were expecting, because also Harald, as you can see, has not been able to join, unfortunately. So anyway, let's turn to some of these questions. So one that's come up is, do you think an external, in brackets, expert agency would be better for speak up investigations rather than internal employees that only do these investigations 1 or 2 times a year? I don't know who wants to take that on first. Or if anyone wants to take that on.
I don't mind taking it first, having been involved in everything from really, really serious stuff. My prosecutions are involved to, the more run-of-the-mill type issues. It's a really interesting one. I think in certain circumstances, yes. Obviously, if you've got a really serious issue, you're going to have external lawyers and forensic accountants and all kinds of things. In that sort of middle tranche where you might have misconduct on a sort of more limited level at a senior level, for example, sometimes having specialist investigators can be really helpful. It also gets away from some of the conflicts of interest, because necessarily anybody in the organisation is going to know people in the organisation, and they are going, potentially to be affected by that. So, and sometimes it's just not possible to get somebody internally who doesn't feel, that level of conflict. So they can be really, really helpful. I think in certain instances, however, they can be unhelpful because they don't know the business and what, and therefore can't always spot issues. So I will often say some of the best compliance officers I've ever had in teams that I've run have been people drawn from the business, because they understand when somebody in the business is not telling the truth, or they understand how the business works better and therefore can spot inconsistencies better. And so I think for the fact pattern in front of you and the circumstances in front of you and the seniority and all of that, you need to sort of pick the right resource. And I think sometimes somebody drawn from the business is absolutely the ideal resource, because they know the business, they understand it, and they understand whether the truth lies or not. And so I think, both have their place depending on what you're dealing with.
Fiona or Lisa, did you want to add anything to that, or I can move on to the next question?
Yeah, I reiterate everything Joe has said there. I think it's, in some circumstances you will have to have that external managed company, because there will be too much of a conflict of interest for those individuals trying to manage the investigation.
Cool, perfect. So another question that came through was, do employees / workers trust externally managed whistleblowing channels more or less? I mean, I don't know if you'll know this exactly. I don't know if this is more of an opinion question, but I don't know if anyone wants to give that a go.
Yeah, I think sometimes, people with new technologies and so on, that they don't trust the new technologies that are out there, and often that they might find it is easier to speak to a nominated individual in a company, because they know that that individual is going to remain, their details confidential and so on. And it's a lot easier, saying it to a person that is there going to support you. So I do think if you don't show employees how that external whistleblowing system works in practice and shows them this is what it does, this is how it redacts the information, this is what happens when you make a report, it is hard for workers to trust that external whistleblowing system. So I think, again, it goes back to the aspect of trust and training. You need to gain their trust in order for that system to actually work.
I would just add that I think it's really important to provide options. I think, different people are going to feel comfortable reporting in different ways. And one of the most important things you can do as an organization is to provide options, because you just want the reports to come in. You don't want people to be put off because they don't trust the online system, and you don't want people to be put off because they don't want to email, compliance at. So I think it's really important that you just look for those options. They've got local options. They can talk to their line manager, they can report via the whistleblowing channel, and then they can find the channel that suits them best.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I think it's no one channel will suit everybody, and therefore it is important that people have confidence in all of the channels. One of the things that I've bumped up against occasionally is where people need to blow the whistle on somebody who is in my line management, and they're concerned that that will be an issue for me. That's why I think sometimes it's really super important to communicate where certain things will be reported and what channels the compliance team have to step outside where appropriate. And certainly I've always had really good relationships with the non-executive directors who look after the sort of ethics and the speak up side of the business, and who I report to from a statistical point of view, because then I can have that independent line with them to talk outside of my own line management, which I think is really, really important, and really important for people to understand. Because when I've had conversations with reporters and explained that, they've instantly kind of gone, oh, right, okay, I feel better now that I know, you have a different channel yourself to talk it through.
Cool, perfect. An interesting question came in, so I would like to know what the answer to this would be. I'm not going to say the football star's name because I don't want to completely mispronounce the name of the football star, but someone said that a football star this morning made a TikTok debut having millions of views in a couple of hours. So the question was, could TikTok videos become a form of communicating compliance topics within organizations? And to your knowledge, do you know anyone that potentially has started this? That'd be quite innovative. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know if that sounds like a good idea or not.
We have certainly the style. We've not put them on TikTok, but we've imitated the style because I quite like TikTok actually, but that's because I've got godchildren who force me onto it. But I've quite enjoyed being on there and seeing different things that I've found useful. Like there's a great woman who does a lot of Excel top tips, and I am rubbish with Excel, so I've found that quite useful. And I think it's certainly a way of engaging people in a different way, and people learn differently, people engage around topics differently. And I think the sort of shorter, punchier videos, we talked about micro-learning earlier on, can sometimes really resonate with people. And where we've put them to good use is those sort of short, sharp videos where something has changed. So the ever-changing sanctions against Russian entities this year, being able to do something like that has really helped us. And then just fun ones about reminding people about gifts and hospitality and things like that. We've made a bit of use of those, and I think we'll continue to make a use of those, particularly where you've got things like Yammer or Workplace or other sort of social media within the company. You can get those out fairly quickly. And again, it's part of the multi-channel strategy of communicating things is, some people will like sit down formal learning, other people will much prefer those shorter, sharper videos. So I'm all for it, because I think you've got to try and hit most of the people most of the time, and different channels and different approaches will help you do that.
Cool. That's cool that you've used the sort of TikTok format. Maybe that could be something for people to use. I think, Joe, just before you leave, this might be one for you, especially potentially in your previous roles. But for people that have employees across Europe, but their corporate language is English, is it sufficient to just communicate your compliance program, for example, your code of conduct in English? Is that sufficient enough, or should it be local language?
I have just been called to go, so I will make this very quick. I always say for comprehension, you should do it in as many languages as is appropriate. I've normally had a de minimis cut-off, but depending on the organisation. But from my perspective, if you want people to really understand it, communicate it in the language that they will understand. If you've got really proficient English speakers, great, but most of the time you'll want it in local language. And with that, I better go.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Bye-bye.
So Lisa and Fiona, if we carry on for a little bit, I think there's only a couple more questions to go through.
I was just going to add something, just a suggestion on that, because I know one of the challenges, I mean, obviously, if you can put the materials into local language, that is absolutely, what you should do. But for a lot of companies, and particularly smaller companies, budgets are tight, and that's difficult. And getting the translation right can also be difficult. It's not always easy with topics like ethics and integrity to have those, translated in a standard way and have it come out the other end with the right tone and saying what you meant to say. So one of our clients actually took what was English language material and then trained up a couple of members of their legal team who then went and promoted it in local language in the two markets where they had non-English speakers. So, there are just other ways around it, but ultimately you should absolutely put it in the languages that you have employees speaking. Otherwise, it serves no purpose for them.
Fiona, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree there with Lisa. It's hard enough, learning a second language, never mind, abiding by rules and requirements that is not in your first language. So absolutely, yeah, it has to be transposed into the language that your employees are speaking.
Cool, perfect. So another question that's come through, it says, building on the earlier question about external companies for reporting, in your experience, is it easier for workers to report to a person known to them, in brackets, who is in the compliance department, or someone completely unknown to them?
Yeah, so I think in some scenarios it is easier for someone to actually approach someone that is known to them, because there's that level of trust there already. And I think that can be very effective. And I think, as Lisa had mentioned earlier, you have to give people, the options of different avenues of where they can do that. And in some instances, what Joe mentioned, there could be a line manager or a senior exec that you need to avoid that chain. And in those scenarios, it's the nominated other individuals across the entity that are very important, such as people that confidentiality would be largely part of their role, or just someone that's in the organization that is known to people, that is very approachable, they're confidential. I think I think it can be easier, but again, it depends on the scenario.
I had in my list of communication strategies, which really is there for you to kind of think about how those might work for you, to put a face to compliance. And I think, by that I mean, making known that network of trained compliance ambassadors, if you have one, but also introducing yourselves as the compliance team, to become a familiar face to others in the organization. And often the compliance team kind of sits back in its group, office, and and people don't know who sits there. So, you know, finding fun ways, whether it's newsletter profiles or photos on the internet, you know, tell them your favorite hobbies and I don't know, you know, whatever, just letting people see that you're approachable, that you're a real person, just really helps to reinforce that open door culture in an organization, makes you somebody who they feel like they do know and that they can approach if they don't feel comfortable speaking to somebody locally for whatever reason. It's just all about giving people options.
Cool, perfect, thank you. This sort of follows on from that question. So someone else has put in, are employees hesitant to become the trusted recipient, especially if the organisation is a more collegiate run organisation? I don't know if either experienced that.
It's probably one for Fiona, just because she's got this network of employees who sort of act for employees. But I would say, in any case, that, you know, as long as they know how to escalate things properly, so that they're not the ones that are having to be dealing directly with a case, but rather the one who something can be reported to, and then they know who and how to escalate it to. It takes some of the pressure off them.
Yeah, I think as well, like when, you know, you have those nominated individuals across the entity, you have to make sure that they're suitable and, you know, that they are happy to do it as well, because it is a lot of onus on someone, you know, to take that on themselves and report it and make sure that, you know, they keep that information safe and secure. But yeah, so yeah, it is often that it is more trusted, yeah.
Cool, perfect. So I think we'll wrap up shortly. I didn't know if there was any sort of last remarks or advice that either of you wanted to give whilst we're on this topic before I close the session. I mean, you've given some really valuable information, really insightful and interesting. I know it'll be interesting to the audience, but I don't know if there's sort of any lasting advice or quick tips or anything that you'd like to give.
So I would say, as a communications person, my advice would be to get to know your communications team. You know, I think probably most people on this call are the heads of compliance, or they're sort of working in the legal department, working in the compliance department, maybe in HR. But get to know your internal communications team. You know, sit down with them, talk to them about what your challenges are, the tone you're trying to set around compliance, and you know, let them help you figure out how to get your messages out, because they're experts in this, and that's something that often I find the compliance people we work with don't naturally do.
Yeah, and then my advice then would be, I think, you know, get the right foundations in place first, you know, your code of conduct, your policies and procedures, proper governance, and then really focus on the actual employees and workers themselves, training and communicating effectively, keep it simple, you know, don't overload employees with all this information that they might need to know. You know, the compliance team will always need to know more detail than the admin or the finance team, and make it easy for them, you know, have the channels readily available for them, and, you know, have those nominated individuals be the approachable ones.
Thank you both, and thank you both so much for participating in today's event. It's been great. Thank you, Lisa, for facilitating the panel discussion part. I know we were one person down, but still managed to get through it. And thank you, Fiona, and of course Joe, who's had to leave, for answering those questions. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to let the audience members know that we do, on our EQS group site and also Integrity Line site, we do have some useful thought leadership educational material on compliance, whistleblowing, gifts and hospitality, anything to do with compliance topics. We have a lot of materials available. Also, this is day one of the ECEC, so there's still a session left after this at 5 o'clock CET time. And we also have a full day of different compliance topic sessions tomorrow as well on day 2. of the event. But thank you for your audience participation in the poll questions and the questions that you have entered in today. I hope you've enjoyed today's session. I know I have. And again, apologies for the technical difficulties at the beginning, as well as Harald not being able to join. We know he had some great points to make. So I will see if I can do a separate session, probably separate to the ECEC, with him on this topic as well. But I hope you've enjoyed, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you again, Lisa and Fiona, so much.
Thank you.